Hey everyone, and welcome back. It's Delana. Today, I want to unpack some of the realities behind mass shootings. I'm diving into a story that is as heartbreaking as it is complex. We're going to weave through the facts, statistics, and hard questions surrounding these events, focusing on a recent tragedy that has reignited debates on gender identity, mental health, government surveillance, and gun laws. My goal is just to inform, not to inflame. I want to stick to verified data and expert insights. I do have some friends though that like to not like let facts get in the way of a good story, but I, however, like the facts. So let's start at the heart of this latest incident. And it's so sad and unfortunate. But on Wednesday morning, August 27th, 2025, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, children at Annunciation Catholic School were gathered in church pews for Mass. Their voices were echoing in prayer during their first week back at school. Then chaos erupted. A 23-year-old individual named Robin Westman, who identified as a transgender, opened fire with legally purchased firearms, a rifle, a shotgun, and a pistol, killing 2 children and wounding 17 others before taking his own life. Westman had posted online in hours leading up to the attack. And he did post, here is him here, and he did post on actually YouTube. And he even was scrolling messages like "kill Donald Trump" on gun magazines. Authorities are still piecing together the motive, but the shooter's online activity, including a manifesto like rant, painted a picture of a deep-seated anger and isolation. This isn't just another statistic, it's a human story of loss. Families are shattered, a community in mourning, but it raises burning questions. Why does this keep happening? And are there patterns? Who commits these acts, and why, despite vast government surveillance tools, was this preventable threat missed? Way back years ago, when after Sandy Hook happened, my sons we were at a shoe store. My youngest son, I believe he was in kindergarten at the time, and he wanted these shoes that light up when you walk. The shoes light up on the near the soles. And his older brother, who I think was 9 at the time, said to him, "Oh, Graham, don't get those shoes, because if you get those shoes and a shooter comes in your classroom, you're going to bring attention to yourself and he's going to shoot you." And I was just horrified. I just thought, oh my gosh, at kindergarten, that wasn't even not even a thought. And it's so sad that kids these days are growing up and those are the things that they think about. Or he associated lighting up shoes to a shooter coming in the classroom. It's very sad. That's one of the reasons I kind of wanted to unpack this and figure out, how is this happening. In the aftermath of all of this, social media has buzzed with claims linking transgender identity to violence. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey pushed back, urging people, to stop villainizing our trans community, and for a good reason. This is a post that he posted. He is tired of being trans. I wish my brain wasn't washed. So it's just very unfortunate, and he is in this community is starting to get linked more and more to mass shootings. Have a listen here to Jesse Waters, who said this yesterday.
Transgender who hates Trump, Christians, and Jews shoots up kids at a Catholic school, and the media wants to take away your handgun. So how are we supposed to protect ourselves from trans shooters? The media is bad at pattern recognition. We aren't. Just 2 years ago, another trans 20-something walked into a Christian school in Nashville with a rifle and shot 3 kids and 3 adults. They buried the manifesto and locked down the case. We've seen trans shootings in Colorado and in Maryland. They even shot up an ICE facility in Texas. And it seems like half of Antifa's trans. A couple of they-thems just got popped for firebombing Teslas. The mayor of Minneapolis says, you can't say that.
Anybody who is using this as an opportunity to villainize our trans community or any other community out there has lost their sense of common humanity. We should not be operating out of a place of hate for anyone. We should be operating from a place of love for our kids.
I don't hate anyone who thinks they're trans. I feel sorry for them. But statistically, the trans population has been prone to violence. That's not villainizing, that's reality. And if you can't recognize reality, you're in danger. We love the American people, especially American children. And if they're troubled and believe they're somehow a girl trapped in a boy's body, we want to get them help. We don't want to give them hormones and operate on them. Society shouldn't be trying to produce more trans kids. We shouldn't be encouraging an emotional disorder or whatever this is. And doctors should stop profiting from it. Great Britain ended child sex change surgeries. They said it's barbaric, and they're right. And politicians should stop elevating the trans issue like it's the civil rights struggle of the 21st century. You see it all over Minneapolis.
Minneapolis will continue to be a safe haven for our trans community.
For being a safe haven for transgender individuals.
We have sued them for gender-affirming care. Yes, we are not going to scapegoat our transgender community.
When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them.
So when your 9-year-old tells you he's a horse, do you let him sleep out in the barn and eat hay? What are we doing here? Just a few years ago, the psychiatric community classified transgenderism as a mental illness. Then doctors went woke and removed it as a condition, and now millions of young Americans are identifying themselves as trans and getting high fives. When someone has an illness, we should treat it instead of affirm it. We don't celebrate schizophrenia. We don't encourage depression. Teenagers are confused. Sometimes these things are just a phase. And if they're not, all right, then a grown man can wear a dress. If he wants to do that in America, he has that right. We're a pretty darn tolerant society. But the left's weaponizing trans kids and turning them into culture warriors. And they've been turned loose against the church, schools, and Trump. You see it, I see it. The trans Klan has a militant wing, and it's out for blood. They're taking lives, defiling churches, and freaking everybody out. And some politicians are doing more to protect shooters like Westman than soft targets like schools. In 2023, private schools in Minnesota begged Governor Walz to fund more school safety. They told him it was an urgent and critical need. Minnesota had an $18 billion budget surplus, but the governor didn't do it. Instead, he turned Minnesota into a trans sanctuary. And his attorney general, Keith Ellison, sued Trump so they can keep castrating little boys. Tim Walz failed. Our leaders keep failing us. They failed us during COVID, on trade, on immigration. They say they care about kids, but they locked them down and oversaw an obesity and chronic disease epidemic. And now there's a growing trans epidemic, and they won't even admit it. Just like crime. They created a crisis and then lie about it and blame you for not being compassionate. But their fake compassion is getting people killed.
So let's actually look at the numbers. Mass shootings are overwhelmingly committed by cisgender men. Since 1982, 149 mass shootings in the U.S. were carried out by males shooters, with women involved in just a handful. When it comes to transgender or non-binary individuals, the percentage is actually minuscule. Out of over 300 mass shootings tracked since 2009, only about 4 involved transgender perpetrators. And that's roughly like 1.3%. Broader databases like the Gun Violence Archives count of over 4,400 mass shootings since 2014, identified just one confirmed transgender shooter, equating to about 0.02%. Another analysis pegs it at 0.128% of all mass shootings. Experts in gender and criminology emphasize that transgender people are far more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators, facing higher rates of assault, suicide attempts, and hate crimes. There's actually no evidence of an epidemic of inherent link to gender ideology issues. In fact, misgendering or falsely claiming shooters are trans, as happened in the past, like in what happened in Madison, Wisconsin, often stems from misinformation campaigns. But what about mental health? Many speculate the
Transgender who
sorry, psychologically, they, I'll put it up here. Here is some, all the shootings that have the recent shootings that have happened that they are blaming on wokeness. They're saying that it's not really the mental health issue. It does go a lot deeper than the mass shooting profiles, that they're not the primary driver. In 77 out of 155 mass shootings since 1982, shooters displayed prior signs of mental health struggles, only about 50%. However, severe psychiatric illnesses like schizophrenia affect only about 20% of mass shooters, and psychotic disorders are just about 8%. Half of all mass shootings involved have no clear mental illness as the main cause. The factors that really matter are the traumatic childhood, social isolation, and access to firearms play larger roles. For transgender individuals specifically, higher rates of mental health challenges often stem from societal stigma and discrimination, not inherent problems needing to be addressed as a group. Blaming an entire community overlooks that they face elevated risk of gun violence themselves. So, what is this whole conspiracy claims? I saw this post by Candace Owens yesterday on X, and it reads: "The government is behind this. Each shooting is more traumatizing than the last because the goal is to scare us into compliance. It is the tried and true strategy of 9/11 and the Manson murders, both CIA operations. Do not ever agree to hand over your Second Amendment rights." So she wasn't specific. She did post it yesterday, the day of the shooting, but she didn't specifically talk about the Minnesota shooting. She has historically commented on shootings, often critiquing media narratives or just linking it to cultural issues, but no evidence of a specific government involvement claimed that I've ever saw. With that said, conspiracy theories persist, like those around false flags, but they lack substantiation. I don't believe the government orchestrated this, and experts agree. Mass shootings are typically lone acts driven by personal crisis, not state plots. However, I did read the book Chaos, which was recommended by her, and I watched her podcast with the ex-CIA operative, and it is extremely eye-opening. Like, once you jump down those rabbit holes and see kind of what goes on with the CIA and behind the scenes, and how they used certain manipulations to kind of herd the public, almost like George Orwellian way. It is really hard to kind of not see it. And so I do understand where she gets her perspective. And that's one of the reasons I did more of a deep dive into this. And I also, in a couple other videos that I did, I on the Promise software and Palantara, those are both government funded surveillance companies and data collecting services that the government has actually paid for to prevent these kind of things. So what is the concern? The government's tech arsenals are failing to stop these threats, like Westman, who posted warnings online. So I just wanted to explore that. Like, first, there was Promise, and this dates back to the 1980s, a case management software developed by prosecutors but mirrored in controversy. Allegations from Inslaw, and those are the creators, claimed that U.S. Department of Justice stole it, added backdoors, and distributed modified versions globally for surveillance, including Israel. And part of that was called the so-called Octopus Conspiracy, involving many money laundering and a lot of spying. While Promise influenced early digital tracking, it largely was obsolete today, and it is replaced by modern systems. And then we enter Palantir. Again, I did another video about that in Peter Thiel, and that was founded post 9/11. This big data firm partners with governments for predictive analytics, tracking everything from terrorism to immigration. And one of the reasons that the government is giving them so much money is to try to stop these mass shootings, and that's, they're part of this whole surveillance thing. We're watching you, and they're looking at all your data and collecting that data, vast amounts of data sets, and to flag threats. But it's not like a magic bullet for mass shootings. And why? And why do these surveillance operations fail? You know, data overload is one of them. Billions of online posts daily, algorithms miss subtle threats and noise. However, he did post very blatantly on YouTube. I don't know how the algorithm didn't pick that one up. There's privacy laws, limits on monitoring without warrants prevent blanket cyber snooping. And there's human factors. Shooters may not post explicitly, or just the tips are being ignored, like what happened in Uvalde. There's also effectiveness gaps. Studies show increased surveillance doesn't reliably prevent mass violence. It's better at post-event analysis. In Westman's case, online posts were there, but not flagged in time. Experts argue for better assessment teams over more tech. Finally, let's turn to how many mass shooters and what age they were. The data is very mixed. The average age is about 34, with a median around 32, but trends show younger perpetrators recently. The median dipped to 22 and a half in 2022, often tied to school or public venues. Westman at 23 fits that shift. And as you can see here, under 21 is 25%, and those are mostly schools and public spaces. And then you have the 20 to 30-year-olds, which is about 50%. And that's mostly workplaces or offices. And then you have the over 40, which is familial or targeted areas. I talked to somebody, random person one time who was into guns, and I said, this obvious, is a problem. What do you think the solution is? And he said that he thinks that the gun age should be raised to 21. And according to these statistics, I think he thought there was a lot more shootings under 21. But yeah, he said one of the solutions would be to increase the age to 21, like alcohol. And I always think, like, you can't buy a beer at 21, but you can buy a handgun. So it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, federal laws are already setting 21 for handguns and 18 for long guns, which are just rifles and shotguns. But proposals like the Age 21 Act aim to unify it at 21 for all firearms, backed by evidence that could reduce youth suicides and homicides by 12%. Some states, like Florida, have done so with positive impact. Critics argue it fringes on rights, but supporters say maturity matters. Brains aren't fully developed till 25. So, what is the solution to these mass shootings? Are they inevitable? There's been lots of protests about guns. And one thing I know for sure about the United States, they're never giving up their guns. There's no politician that's going to run on let's get rid of guns or increase gun laws. It's just never going to happen. So, what is the solution? You know, I truly believe the prevention lines and getting down to the root causes. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this video and do a deep dive into it. It's like, what is actually causing these mass shootings? Is it trauma, isolation, easy gun access? And we're not scapegoating certain groups, because that doesn't help. Like, unless we know what the real problem is, like, kind of scapegoating these different groups or the wokeness. Yes, I'm against wokeness, but what is the real problem? And that's the only way we're going to fix it. And obviously relying on surveillance is not working. And they need to focus on facts over fear. So they just have to keep pushing for change, and whatever that is. I don't know what the solution is. Please comment, let me know what you think it is. But people, there's protests on both sides. I don't know if anybody knows what the answer is. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. What is the solution to this mass shootings, especially with children? It just breaks my heart that kids go to school and have to worry about this. These poor kids are just at school. God, they were at church praying, and and it's just so sad. I just feel like there has to be a stop for this. It really, truly does. I don't know. I don't know what the solution is, but you guys, please like, subscribe, share, and definitely let me know your thoughts, because yeah, I think it's good. Everybody needs to talk about it. What's the solution to this, and how can we hold people accountable? thank God that the parents went to jail for that shooting in Michigan. The parents gave this child that they knew had mental problems a gun. It's just crazy. So more accountability, I think, is definitely a step in the right direction. So again, please like, subscribe, share, and I'll talk to you guys soon.